Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm going to call for the adoption agenda. I see there's no additions to the agenda, so I'd like to make the call for adoption agenda. Captain Mayor Sahara. Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay, and then adoption of the previous minutes from the June 26th Committee of the Whole. Anyone see any changes?
All three hands, so we rejoice there.
Wow, they're that bad.
1, 2, 3.
Councillor Wilkinson. Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay, we have no delegations. We're going on, and our first order of business is F3 Corporate Services revamping of the budget.
Good morning. A little while back, we were asked by the council to look at a different budget presentation. After looking at various communities ones, and we went to the GFOA and looked at the ones that won the awards there, we looked at all the different ones around and came up with some ideas that we thought were the most helpful or the most interesting to put into the budget presentation. So I'll just bring this up on the screen here. For starters, we thought we'd do each area of the organisation in per department. We used to do it sort of via the financial statements order, and this now would have, so there'll be a section for operations, a section for community services, section for corporate services, etc. Throughout the budget. So there'll be a header page for each department that just sort of brings up the just what that department does, just a listing of the different areas that that department looks after, as well as a little pie chart here we thought was interesting, where you could just have a quick look and see the portion of the town's expenses that that department takes up. Even since this was printed, we've had another idea of that could possibly be the amount of taxation that that department uses, which could be more interesting than just the amount of just the expenses. So again, this will be a living document. It will always be changing as we think of new things year over year. And then in the front will just be a summary of that department's also operations here, what their part of the budget is. Then we would go into a breakdown of each of those different areas within that department. So under utilities, just a quick rundown of what utilities would be. Then this chart would then show the amount within that part of the pie chart that you've seen on the front page that this particular department takes up. So I've just got some notes here to make sure I don't forget anything. So with the this first section here, we thought this would be an area where we could put some of the sort of information that we didn't really have in the older style budget. The older style budget, we more concentrated on the differences between one budget to the next, so you never really got to know sort of the guts of that department, some of the things they do, some of the things they look after. So we could have some facts like the number of kilometres of pipe or water pipes we have in town, how much an average water break might cost. Those types of things would be in this top section here, and it would be to help more towards budgeting into the future. For example, under parks, it would be something like however many kilometres of trail, it costs this much to maintain every kilometre of trail. So when you're making decisions on building new trails, there'll be an impact on operations, and then we'd have an idea of how much that actually would be. At the moment, we are in the process of actually getting more costing breakdowns for these types of things, so that, for example, for the trails now, we have one area where we put all the maintenance together, and it's parks and trails in the same area, so it's a bit more difficult to pull those out. Mm-hmm. So we're going through each department with the directors and looking at all those different things that we can pull out to get those types of information, in the cost of water breaks, the cost of per kilometre of trails, to get those sorts of information in there. In the old style, we never really had any of that information for you. It was just more, last year we're spending this, this year we're spending that, because we're doing this one little extra thing. And then within the actual amounts, the actual dollar amounts in the middle here, we've combined a lot of the smaller ones in so that it's not broken down into the large amount that it was with the old one. I just bring up the, so this was the old water style one here, where we had lots of different areas broken down, and a lot of them were really the smaller amounts. So we thought we would combine most of those smaller amounts just into one area here under general revenues or other expenses, but left the more significant ones there. One thing you'll notice with the old one is that I had a difference column here, so you could see the differences between, right? So with some of the ones that we've looked at, I actually found something that I thought was quite probably more helpful than that, where there is a summary sheet where you can list your types of expenses like insurance or contracted services, and they're all sort of together in that summary sheet. And that then would have the differences there. And the reason I'm liking that myself, I'd like your opinion on that though, is that, for example, like insurance, so if the insurance goes up $10,000 for the year, on each of those sections that I used to show you, I used to say insurance went up, insurance went up, insurance went up, insurance. So a lot of the things that actually increase over the whole organisation. So having those on a summary sheet, we can then have the differences between the two budgets listed all in one place. And in this area, we'll just concentrate on the budget for this year for this particular area and the items that we're wanting to present to you. Moving on to the next section down here, the objectives or highlights section, would be where we would put those types of things that are new, that are happening. So some of those differences from the first sheet would appear here underneath the individual ones if they're an individual change. For example, if I scroll down to the sewer one, obviously this year we had the contracted and general services went up from 17 to 18 because we have a new water treatment plant coming in, and we had budgeted when that was going to come online. So those differences would still be here for the individual ones, but those ones over the whole organisation wouldn't be repeated again and again and again within each section. And with the going back to the numbers part here, I actually hope to have more information in this one than what we've done. We've sort of had another thought since we printed this. Under here we would actually be putting information like the amount of debenture principal that's paid from this area, the amount that goes to reserves from this area, and then this bottom line instead of net operating would then show you the net taxation impact from that particular department, rather than have it as a separate area. So you'll be able to know from sewer exactly where those dollars are going and the impact that this particular department has on your taxation. So in the objectives and highlights area, we've had anything new for the year, anything we might be concentrating on from other years, like for example, water didn't really have a lot of change from year to year. But we could put that we're concentrating on the hydrant flushing or maintaining so many kilometres of water line, or anything that the director might find interesting for you to know this is what our money goes on. So that's just a quick run through of the mock-up that we came up with. And this one would be one that is shown when we're actually doing the budget deliberations to help council with the decisions they make on the budget. It will also be going online for people if they want to look in depth, but we're also intending to make a smaller booklet style budget for the public, where we would pick out some of those highlights and objectives for the year per department, have some of those did you knows,
lots of graphs.
That's a fact, or these that sort of more sort of letting them know what's happening with the year, where the money's going, that type of thing. But this will also be available online if they want to go in and look at more detail on things. So also included in this, there will be other areas in the presentation, obviously. The summary sheet that was mentioned earlier that would have those differences listed. There'll also be a 3-year operational plan. And obviously the capital budget would be there as well for the year, and then a 5-year capital plan will also be attached to that. There'll be a section that I would go over the reserves, what's happening with reserves going in and out. And I'd also like to add a section showing you the debentures and where we're standing with all our debentures, show you your debt limit, which is the amount we can borrow, and your debt servicing limit, which is the amount that we can spend on those debentures. So be able to sort of keep you in line to where we're standing with those debentures based on the budget that will be presented to you. Also, I've been talking with our communications coordinator about looking at a citizen budget engagement program. So we've been looking at a couple of those where citizens can go in, maybe things like, for every $1,000 of my taxes, where does it go, or those types of things as well. So that's something else that we'll be looking to incorporate for this budget presentation as well. So before we got too far into creating this whole thing, I thought I'd just bring this quick little mock-up to the committee and just get any feedback from council on what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see, etc.
Okay, any Councillor Byers?
Okay, so through the chair to administration, thank you very much for doing this. I was definitely one of the advocates for this, and I know others were as well. I like what you've done so far and what you've mentioned, some of the additions since it's been printed. I think some of those are fantastic things to include in there. So something else I was interested in seeing in there was like a party departmental initiative that linked to our strategic plan. If there was a way we could incorporate how this department and what we're spending on, how that aligns up with our strategic plan. I know that's still a living document at this point in time too. As well as if there are any recent innovations or efficiencies that have been found in the department. Like for instance, like the snow removal, they learned a different process, they tried a new technique, and it's been really successful. If things like that could be included in that as well, so we can see that cost savings benefit area too. But I think it looks fantastic. I'm kind of excited about the budget.
Okay, I believe it's Councillor Swenson, and Mayor, you had your hand up?
Yeah, great. Thank you through the chair. Yeah, I think this is a big improvement as well. I know it's a lot of work, but I'm wondering if it's possible to have any kind of long-term trends. Like are these going up over the long term, or are they flatlining over 5 years? Or I know it's a lot of work, but that would be useful.
Thank you. Through the chair, no, I don't think that's actually not that much work. And it is something that we are doing a lot more of, trend analysis and those types of things. And I think that we would certainly be mindful of those, in particular where the trend is of interest or of note, and showing that in some of these sections, say, hey, the trend on this expense is that it's going down, we've gained some efficiencies, or the trend on this is it's becoming much more expensive to provide this service or whatever. But yeah, those are certainly can be very relevant pieces of information, and we intend to provide more of those as well.
Just a little bit more, if I may. I love the idea that you're going to try to get the department done in one page, like operations in one pager. I think that's a fantastic idea. I noticed like the photo there. I don't think photos are important to me, but if you need to fill space, go ahead and put a photo in.
It was a bit of a filler.
Right.
So there may be some sprinkled through there. They'd be more relevant than the picture that was there, but just yeah.
And then you mentioned talking about some of the benchmarks that we. So the benchmarks from the strategic plan. I think if we have the available information, put them in here. That's a great place for them. I don't know if the timelines work out.
It may not work out for this fall, but in future budget cycles.
But good work. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mayor Sahara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I'm really excited about this. This is something that we've talked about over the last number of months, and I really like it. When you're talking about breaking it down on a per tax dollar basis, I really would like to make sure that that is on an average house assessment that people can relate to, not just an overall 25% of the budget goes towards, or 25% of taxes goes to this. Actually, on an individual average basis, $10 or $15 of your tax bill goes to this service. And I think that's one of the things that I thought was really positive in the Hinton budget, is they actually broke that down. You could really get a good idea of, okay, this is how much on my tax bill this is actually going to be contributing to that particular service. So really look forward to it, and as you mentioned, it is a living document, so I'm sure we'll continue to find.
Respond.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and to the mayor through the chair. Absolutely, and I think one of the things that we're definitely doing is also making a distinction between the budget that's presented to council and then also providing some public information on the budget. And I think that's where you'll see more of that information in terms of how it relates directly to the taxpayers and in an accessible way that they can all clearly see and understand. And people understand money, right? And so if I'm spending $1,000, 15 is going to police, 10 is fire, and then people can start to see what's actually happening with their money. And our experience has been that the communities that do a really, really good job of explaining where their tax dollars go generally do a little bit better in terms of that kind of, I just throw my money into the black hole and I don't know what I get out of it. And part of that is we just don't do a good enough job of telling citizens about the services that we are providing, because a lot of them are generally invisible to them, right? And so we're really looking forward to engaging the citizens on that level. But it will kind of be two kind of separate processes, although obviously very closely connected.
Any other questions from Councillor Curry? You got it right.
Thank you. Good. Through the chair. I just wanted to say thank you too. I really like this. After we had looked at a few different ones, I think this will be a lot easier to read. And I just would echo that I would also like to see the strategic plan and the benchmarks in there, just so we can see that link. And I think that helps us to kind of know that we're following the path we had set.
Any other questions? Okay, I would just comment, I do like the changes. It is very easier to read. So like for us as councillors, we can read through it, but the general public, when they look at that, it makes more sense. And as far as the pictures, that pie shape, someone can automatically look at it and it catches your eye. Like people, the average person wouldn't be aware that 25% of my tax dollars go towards this. So the other idea echoed in the room about giving a breakdown. So if you have a tax bill X amount of dollars, are you aware that an example, $5 of your taxes pays to clean the roads or whatever it is? So that is a good idea. You know, good job. It's great improvements. So thank you, job well done. Okay, no other questions, so we'll move on. I guess you're on there again. Financial disclosure and accountability policy. Have you as well, Sarah?
So this is something that we've been working on for a little while. It was mentioned a few months back about having a sort of financial accountability policy for some of the larger amount of monies that we give out to organisations within the town. This is the policy we've come up with. It's fairly concise, just to policies intended to balance where we establish a clear framework for financial accountability reporting for our clients receiving substantial taxpayer dollars. So the first one I have in yellow here is just looking for input whether for which amount you would like this policy to come into play for. I popped 100,000 in there, just like some feedback from the committee on whether that's the amount you would like, or you'd like a different amount there to have this particular policy kick in. So when they get that amount of money, the responsibilities would be that they, listing their responsibilities here, to disperse them in an efficient manner, following competitive procurement practices, just like we have our purchasing policy. They have something in place that would help with the distribution of their funds as well. Adhering strictly to their budgets they submit to us, keeping detailed financial records, and the new, what I put in here is completing a professional audit in accordance with the requirements of this policy, and then obviously submitting documentation requested by us throughout the year if we wish. Budgeting requirements that they submit their budget to us every year, which is done now by lots of the organisations. And then the addition of the audit requirements. So there's two different ways I was looking and approaching this. Obviously on an annual basis, that they would have to have a full financial audit completed by an external professional financial services firm, and the personnel involved would have to hold a professional accounting designation. Or we could have it say that on an annual basis they would have a full financial audit completed by our auditing firm, again holding a professional accounting designation. There's actually 3 types of statements that people can get at an end of year statement. So there's one that's just where the financial statement is actually created, and then there's something that's called a notice to reader that tells people that these statements, it's not an engagement review or an audit, which are the other 2 parts. At the moment, this is what the Historical Society usually does, and that's one of the ones that would be affected by this policy. The 3 that actually, I should have said that, the 3 that we have would be the Historical Society, the Recycling Society and the Library, are the ones that would be getting above that 100,000 if that's the benchmark that's set. The review engagement is where a firm comes in and reviews the statements. They do a little bit of inquiry, but there's no full audit done, and they give a review engagement letter that states that this is not these records have not been audited. At the moment, that is what the Recycling Society currently does. And then the other one is obviously a full audit like the town does, and at the moment what the library currently does as well. So there's those 3 different levels of sort of financial statements, and all 3 are the ones that this policy would hit at that benchmark. Each do one of those at this time, so they would all need to move up to the actual audit status. And asking them to move up for that is just that then there'll be the same accountability that we have for our tax dollars with our audit, that the substantial people that get these substantial amounts would also have that same requirement for our tax dollars.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Curry, Meyer?
Through the chair, just what would be the cost difference, I guess, for the societies on the different audits? Do you know that?
I haven't looked into that myself. I'd have to get them to look into that with their auditor if we go with that one,
Okay.
or with our auditor if we go with our auditor.
Okay.
I think it would be different depending on the size of the organisation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can add to that if
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely dependent on the size of the organizations. My anticipation for something the size of the ones we're talking about, we're probably talking about $10,000 at the audit level, and then descending from there in those others. Part of the equation here is certainly we provide most of the funding for these organizations, and so we are basically going to be paying for this, and we certainly recognize that that's part of the process, but we think we'd be paying for a higher value information and a higher value service. So there definitely would be some expense, and depending on the nature of the organization and how much of their organization is funded by the town, we would certainly be participating in funding those additional costs.
Thank you.
Councillor Byers?
Through the chair to administration. Yes, thank you for that answer. And my experience with the library, we do the full audit, and I felt that it was a very worthwhile contribution for the library, and for the board members to say that was my interpretation of it. And it was a big eye-opener, and the recommendations that they were able to give us definitely helped guide the board. I don't know if the other methods would be able to give that recommendation, for the members to see, how to make the next decisions on what to do. If the most expensive one is 10,000, I'd be curious to know what the next levels are, right? To see what those differences are, because I felt it was really helpful having that. So if this is just the scope of the policy is, if this is just for the routine services to the public, would this include things like this year we donated a large amount to the Edson Cycling Society or the Edson Ag Society? Would they be included in this as well, on this type of?
This was more geared towards the ones that would get those amounts per year,
Okay.
not those one-off ones. Those one-off ones, we
Okay.
have funding agreements that are set in place for those large amounts we give as a one-off to the bike club.
Okay.
For example, there'd be a
Okay.
funding agreement for that sets out their requirements. This would be more for an ongoing amount that's given to an organisation every year.
Okay. And just one more question. So one more question. If we didn't do that $100,000 per year, would administration be suggesting a higher amount or a lower amount? And who would that include or not include if we adjusted that?
it's,
I'll take it.
Yeah, you can take
Sure.
this one, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would suggest that we wouldn't go any lower than 100,000. 100,000 to me kind of below that now. It doesn't start to make sense. Now the cost of paying for an audit isn't providing the value. But this was fairly arbitrary, as Sarah described. We just looked at the organizations and tried to feel, once we're expending, $100,000 of taxpayers' money, we've kind of crossed into a new threshold, but that can be set at whatever level that council would feel comfortable. But I would suggest that under $100,000 we start to lose some value there. Yeah.
Councillor Sorensen?
Great, I've been looking forward to this, through the chair, for this policy. Couple of comments. I do agree with the $100,000 number for now. We can change it in the future if it seems too onerous. But I would like to see a couple of things. The ability for the town to earmark funds for a specific project. So if the town was giving $100,000 to an organization, they might want to earmark 10,000 of it for a specific project within that organization's overall budget. And secondly, I would like in here to make a statement that we expect a council member to be on their board, and that we expect that council member to vote on all financial matters. Not necessarily having veto power, but just being
Be present.
and voting on all financial matters. Thank you.
Mayor Sahara? And then
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like this policy. I think it's really important that we have some accountability and some oversight, especially when we're talking about large sums of money that ultimately we around this table are going to be responsible for, to ensure that things are being done right. And it allows us to, when people question us on those expenses, that we can say we've had audits done, everything's going well, everything is kosher, and it'll strengthen organizations too by highlighting some areas where they may need to improve or tighten up some practices. We've done that internally here within our organization. Yesterday, CEO Derek and I met with the organizations. One couldn't be there because she's away on vacation, but we had a good discussion about it. There's a couple points that were raised. Boards are not meeting right now, so they would ask that we just give them opportunity for the boards to review this and provide feedback. So we don't want to rush this, and we want to allow that feedback to come back. So hopefully this will come back to council late September, early October. That would give enough time for these boards to meet and discuss it. One of the other topics that was raised, and I'll leave it to council to decide what they would like to do, but there was a suggestion that the audit only focus on, or the results of the audit only focus on the town portion of the funds, not necessarily other grant funds that were received from other organizations such as the provincial government. I think that would be difficult to do that, and I think that overall, I don't think there should be any separation of the audit. I think it's important that we receive a full audit with exactly what the results are of that organization, so we're completely confident in how we're expending those funds. I don't know if CEO Derek has any comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that just from an auditing perspective, it is, you can't really, I'm not an accountant, but I think you can't really audit a partial part of an organization, because you're looking at practices and processes and those types of things. I understand the organization's perspective in saying, yeah, no, you want to be accountable for the money that we receive from the town, but we also receive money from these other organizations or from our own activities and those types of things. One of the things that we may be able to do, as I've thought about this since yesterday, is we could say, depending on the percentage that the town contributes, that may be one way to answer that. For example, $100,000, but if it was a really, really large organization and the town's got very, very little to do with their overall operation, maybe that changes the picture a little bit. For most of these organizations, though, the town not only for some, basically the sole funder or the core funder, or at least a very, very substantial part of what they do as an organization. And in that context, I just think it's too difficult to try to extricate or separate those things. But that was expressed in that meeting that we had yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Okay, I guess my question is, do we value these three organizations? I think we do, because we have public boards on all three of them. And I hope we're valuing them as well as the council rep. And to me, it is beginning to be a bit of micromanaging, like especially suggestions of if we earmark money of what they have to spend it on. We also give out money, like as you said, to the Ag Society, the Cycling Society. I think we have lots of checks and balances in place, just by the nature of the boards. And yes, I can see you'd like an audit, but again, who is spending that $10,000? Is the town going to cover that for all three organizations?
I have someone answer.
It will become part of the budget that they would
Their
provide
budget,
for,
from
yes.
their 100,000, if they get them, they're down to 90, so then no one
It would just be
needs
put
that.
into their budget and the town would cover their audit costs.
And or we would recognize that instead of 100, now it's 110. I mean, that would be up to.
Or it's 90, and then they
Yeah.
could get a engagement review, or whatever these other things are that they wouldn't need for the $10,000. To me, we have so many checks in place with a public board, which I value, and a council rep, that to demand this $10,000 audit just takes away from the idea that these are nonprofits. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Do you have a question, any comment? No?
Asked and answered.
May I suggest,
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
is with respect to the timeline the mayor suggested
Yes.
there. I think it's important that the organizations have a chance to obviously review this policy. Perhaps what we will do is take back some of the feedback we received. We can make a few adjustments. And at the committee meeting in August, we may bring back those for council's review and then forward that on to those organizations, recognizing that we're not expecting to hear their feedback until into September at least.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'm happy for that, because I've talked to Charles, I've talked to Joan. They're on the boards of these things, are public people, and they don't even know anything about this yet. So
Yeah.
we can't rush into something that we're just devaluing them on the board.
Councillor Swanson?
Just echoing, or not echoing, but commenting on the request for auditing of partial organization. I would advise against that. I think we need to, if we're going to do an audit, let's do an audit of the full organization. I am not sure we need to do an audit annually, and so maybe it's upon request by the town, or I'm not 100% sure we need a full audit every year. And lastly, just getting back to Councillor Wilkinson's comment, we do have three very well organized or very well run organizations that we're talking about right now, but this policy applies in the future. There could be a fourth or a fifth, and we have to assume that not everybody is going to be as well run as these three organizations. So this is preparing us for the future, and I think it's in our best interest to make this as thorough as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Byers?
Through the chair, one more comment I had as well. With the partial audit, I don't even understand how that would work. So I think the full audit would be necessary. But do you think there is an opportunity where you could have a biannual audit? Is that right? Every 2 years that you had the full audit, and then it would help keep us, in the know about, to ensure that the public dollars are well spent, but then not having that like added expense. Is that something that makes sense?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll give my take, and then Sarah,
Yeah,
you can
okay.
add to it as well. Yeah, I absolutely do think that's an option. I don't like the idea of saying by request, because then I feel like council will be really, really hesitant to request that, because then you're basically saying, we don't think you're doing a good job and we want to know what's going on, which is honestly part of the reason that we're crossing this bridge now, is so it doesn't feel so icky for it's not a very that we're just asking questions or interested in financial measures or those types of things, but something like a biannual audit I think is probably reasonable or can work. It certainly save a little bit of expense. One of the things that you may be losing there is audits generally build on themselves year over year, and as you'll have probably already experienced, or certainly those counselors that have been around, the auditor comes back and says, hey, last year we pointed out X, Y, and Z, and they were either improved or not improved. And then if you're just only doing that every 2 years, it just spaces that out a little bit, and so you may not get that type of information as often as possible. But it certainly is something worth considering. Sarah, did you have anything to add to that?
That was one of the points I was going to make, was they do build on each other. So if you did it every 2 years, they'd be going back and doing 2 years worth of auditing, because they need to build it back on the audit that they already did. And the audit is the only one where they can actually give their opinion on what their findings are. The other two, they can't actually give an opinion on anything that they may have audited on. So, yeah.
Councillor Bowden, you have something new to report?
But yeah, just to further say,
Okay.
with the library, they are required to, so they're already doing this project,
Yeah.
and that opinion I found very valuable.
Yeah, and if I may add, all three of these organizations are doing some form of financial control, and so if there's the 3 levels, we have one that's at level 1, one that's at level 2, and one that's at level 3. So we're just suggesting that they would all move to level 3, which is, I don't think, a huge change, and it's certainly not going to impact their day-to-day operations or anything like that. It just I think provides not only the town with a comfort level in the financing, but as Councillor Beyer described, or as we've experienced, the audit process actually helps to strengthen the organizations in terms of all kinds of management practices. We've changed and updated and improved our policies based on audit feedback, and we would expect that these organizations would enjoy that same benefit from the process.
Any other questions or concerns? My one comment on it that, I mean, I like the idea we're putting in a policy, but we must never forget, council has always been responsible. Anyone getting a reasonable funding has been responsibility of the council rep. So every council rep on every board has reported back, it becomes their task. So I'm not against this, but I just caution that's the responsibility of council rep, each board, to report back. Okay, we'll move on to.
I need some clarification on the audit.
Just if you may, Sarah just wants to.
So-
Was there a strong feeling on whether that audit would be conducted by our auditor or by any external auditor? That was one of the questions that we were hoping to get
Oh,
some
okay,
feedback on.
go ahead, I'll get
So
feedback
if
on
I
this.
ran a business, I wouldn't want to have to use someone else's auditor, I'd be using my own. So I'm against having to use the towns. I think they can continue with their own
Your
auditor.
feeling on this?
Well, I think they use their own auditor. I mean, you go to any other business, they use their own auditors and stuff like that. And that, I don't think, we should request them to use ours. If they want to use ours, that's fine. But if they're already using their own, and we got, credible auditors in town, financial auditors in town that are doing it, stay it as is.
Okay, your comment?
The library already uses the town auditor, so, and that was easy just from their presentation, right? The way they present, it was nice to see that, the consistency in it. But if they're using ours or somebody else, then I wouldn't be against someone that's already qualified if it's the requirements.
Councillor
Yeah, I would say either or is acceptable. I don't know if you can word it that way.
Yeah.
That's what I would have said too. Can we keep it as either or?
I think either or as well, and I would concur with Councillor Bevan that if you're already working with a financial services company doing audits or engagement letters or whatever, you want to have that consistency. They know the history of the organization. To force them to use the town auditor just does not make sense. But if they would like to do that instead, I think that could be an option.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, either or, and if we seen a problem with it, then we would kick in our own auditor. So if it's running smooth, don't upset the apple cart. Councillor
And
Wilkinson?
through the chair to administration, does the library pay now for that $10,000 audit?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, to the town.
No, to the auditor.
Okay, that is the same auditor as the town has.
Right, but they,
Okay.
yeah, they
And
pay
they
the
pay-
accounting firm to.
Okay, just so long as
engage
it's all
them
the same,
independently.
because I don't think now they get all the same services and everything, like the library gets maintenance done, the historical society does, but the recreation, the recycle doesn't. So things have to.
Actually, just to answer your question, the library's different because we were mandated to do that, so it's been an ongoing budget. So we are similar as a nonprofit, but the same thing, and you know, you're on the board now, but it was something that we were mandated to do, so we were different. So it's already in the budget to do
Okay.
that, so it wouldn't change their
Asking.
expenses.
Yeah.
Okay, any more on that? Have you got your answers, Sarah, you're looking for?
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to the Regional Assessment Review Board, and I believe a lot of councillors love this.
They're trying to get other people, you see.
Okay, who's gonna bring a presentation on that?
Okay, I'll just bring Tricia Peck here.
Okay.
She is our assessment review board clerk for the town, and she has been working on this change of bylaws. So the base of it was that with the new MGA requirements coming out, we needed to change our bylaw up to meet those requirements. So all 4 municipalities that are now intermunicipal review board have presented the same bylaw, but I'll let Tricia go over the differences between the two and why we kind of had to bring that to you.
So the main changes that brought this forward are in the MGA, they're requiring that we're now putting designated chairs and designated clerks as part of what we're doing here as part of. So we have to now through the bylaw we have to designate these positions. There's a few different we have to. In the past we've had to. This is not different, but we've had to establish the boards themselves, the local assessment review boards and the composite assessment review boards. Now we have, we go one step further, now we have to appoint members to these boards, and we also have to have these designated positions. So that is, that was the big change that has prompted us to bring forward this new bylaws.
Okay. Any questions, Councillor Evans?
Through the chair. Yeah, I like this and that. I know that I did sit on these boards for the last 3 years, and it was quite challenging at times and stuff like that. And then we moved to a board like this here where all the counties are going to get together. And I know that when we went in and took our exams and training and that, it was brutal. It was really, really tough. And now I know that they've revamped it a lot, so it's a lot easier. It pertains more to what we do out here as compared to when we were there. It was all about Calgary, Edmonton, the bigger centers. And you had a barn and horses and that, where, you know, it was tough for us. We studied all the time on that day. I like this idea. I'm glad we went to it. I think it's going to work better, and it has worked better. And that I haven't heard any complaints from it when we went to it before and that. So I like it.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Okay, I just have a question here on appointment of board members. Again, you're saying, 2 for the LARP and 2 for the CARP. Is the town paying for their training, or who pays for this when it's regional now?
Yes, so each of the or groups or each of the municipalities themselves pay for the training of the members from their municipality. So right now we have 2 members of the public that have gone through training, and that has been paid for by the town.
Excellent, excellent.
Yes,
Okay,
and
you still need 1 council member, or may?
No, you
It's
may.
so that,
Yeah.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. So, and so going forward, that's something that we're hoping to bring forward to your meeting next week, actually, is we do, just due to time constraints, we're going to need to hopefully do the 3 readings for the bylaw, and as well, we would bring forward the motions to appoint our members of the public to these boards.
I'm really glad that you've got people trained in.
Yeah,
already.
yeah.
That's perfect.
We have a third member of public who just couldn't just time-wise couldn't get there this year.
Oh,
So
good.
hopefully next year we will actually have a 3rd member.
Really
So
fast, that's
yeah.
really
Oh,
good.
yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
I mean, I did too, but hard work.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions on this bylaw or comments? Councillor Evans?
Through the chair, I've got a question. Is there any advantage or disadvantage of having a council member on this board?
I don't think there's an advantage or disadvantage. We are focusing on making sure that should we have a council member, they would not necessarily sit on the hearings in their municipality.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be familiar with the appeals that you're going to be sitting on anyways. So
If I may add to that too, I think there are some There are some advantages because assessment is a very specific kind of technical thing that many members of the public aren't generally knowledgeable about it just because they haven't interacted with it. And so council members are often just more familiar with the dynamics and dealing with those issues on a more regular basis. It's certainly not necessary, but can be helpful. And so it's something we can consider in the future. In particular, I think this becomes it may become a requirement if we start to struggle to have members of the public step forward, right? Then council would be the ones that we'd be looking to fill that space. But as long as we have interested and engaged and active members of the public, I think it's certainly functional.
So we have two trained counselors wanting to volunteer?
I definitely do not want to vote. But I really like the fact that you're not going to be in your same area. That was
Yeah, no, that's the whole, if I may just add, that's the whole point of this regional, and as Councillor Bevan was describing, it can be incredibly awkward, in particular in a small community, when it's your neighbor, business partner, cousin, uncle, who knows, ex-wife, maybe more applicable for some council members than others. But, it can be really, really challenging, and these decisions are supposed to be made in a completely dispassionate way. There's very strict guidelines and rules, and so any chance you have to depoliticize or to remove emotions is better, and it is so much better when you're just going in as a third party to another community and you don't have any of that kind of history or potential baggage that can come along with that. So for us administratively, we're very, very supportive of the regional dynamic.
So then we can leave that as an option to add a council member then, correct? Because you have two public, because I do agree what I'm hearing in the room, the value of having a councillor, but on the same token, I know that's what made it very uncomfortable for previous councillors is because, like you say, I live in a little town, but if you're moving on to another town,
I think in particular if you're a council, because then the political aspect comes in, you turn down someone's assessment review, now they're not going to vote for me, and that is a whole nother, but if you're going up to Grand Cache or something like that, you don't have that burden of that political connection to the process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any more concerns on this
Just
bylaw?
a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Martin. Bevins?
Excuse me. I've been assaulted before. No.
Would you like some
Through the
water?
chair, and I agree to your point that when, we were sitting on the board and I was sharing it and stuff like that, then when they would compare my property to somebody else's property and that, and, calling it unfair and everything else and that, I couldn't respond sort of deal, I had to, even though mine was worse than what theirs was, I still couldn't, respond to it now because I was sitting as a council rep here for a council and that, and it was tough in your own community here and that, and then afterwards, when you left, you got beat up sometimes. Well, you were the chair and you didn't support me and you got property that's just like mine and so on and so forth. It was tough. It was very, very tough, and that. So, and I wasn't looking for votes. That's not what I was looking for. I was doing it because this is my job to do, and that's support our residents as a whole. So, yeah.
Okay, I think you got the information required. Any other concerns, questions on it?
Yeah, just to reiterate, as Trish was suggesting there, we're anticipating asking for all 3 readings at the meeting coming up here, so just make sure if you have questions or comments, now is the time, so that when we present this bylaw next week that it's prepared. So
I guess I just go one more thing to the chair.
Anything new?
Well, yeah, this is.
Okay.
Will we know if any of the other partners are going to put a council rep on? Will they declare that right away, or will they be discussed?
I don't think we would know, if I may, Chair. I don't think we would know until after they make the appointments, but that's certainly something we can monitor, and if it becomes common, we can consider our approach to that. I don't think the bylaw certainly would allow each community to make, currently as it's written, would allow each community to make that determination.
Okay, and then if we're done with that, then we're moving on to, or should we do questions? How long are we in camera for? Or no, we can do questions. And then,
Yeah, I think we would just follow the agenda.
Yeah,
there.
okay, we'll follow. Any questions from the audience or the media? Yes.
Just a clarification on your policy for the financial disclosure. Is you're going to be looking at it in August, but is it going to take effect for this, because we have to put a budget for the recycle in September to you. And I'm wondering, is it taking place is there a requirement for that? Because you're looking at feedback. There's not a lot of time to provide feedback and provide a budget because we're already working on budget.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can answer
can
that,
answer, okay.
Chair Cohen. Yeah, certainly that would be respective of any dates identified in the budget, whenever the appropriate next cycle was. So I don't think at this point we're gonna achieve having this in place before the September process.
And then a follow-up for the
Yeah,
budget.
go ahead.
We'd like to know what your priorities are for the town, for the recycle. So if you give us your priorities, we can make sure we build the budget with the town's money. I mean, yes, the audit's gonna be for the whole thing, but we will put together a budget of the town's money and reflecting your priorities, but we need your priorities before we put in a budget in September, sort of thing.
Yeah, I like to respond to that. I totally agree what was mentioned here, like in the time frame, and I respect the fact not only you, everyone's putting their budget together in September for October. So yes, I think we're going to run into some
We're doing
timing.
budgets now because
Yeah.
it comes to in September is when it comes. You get it in October.
Right. So I think
I
we're
think
having.
if I may add to that,
Yeah, go
certainly
ahead.
we can discuss as a group our priorities or our focus, things that we would like to see highlighted in your society, and our rep can bring those to, I think, those deliberations.
Because that's really key, that we don't miss something, so that when you do your priorities for the year, because when's your planning sessions for that sort of thing?
September for us, but we can certainly have that conversation ahead of that.
Yeah, that would be really good, because we're doing budgeting in August sort of thing, so.
So is there going to be any room, like without all of us, like where yesterday we had the mayor and town manager go out and meet with the groups? Because we definitely need your feedback. I totally agree, and we're running into a timing thing. We were doing this, we should have done it months ago, but now it's a new rule. So I guess we'll have to be flexible, I guess would be the word to use. Flexible how we do it, because you're planning for 2019, we're passing the bylaw. It puts all the organizations a little bit
We're
awkward.
planning on having something
Yeah.
for the September that's set up. Anna's working on that.
Okay.
So it's a good way for you to see and to give us some feedback on how it works for you. And that's a great way of doing it. And I've said that it's a pain to deal with, but in some ways it's good because it allows us for other planning, because we do get contracts from other municipalities to do it. And it breaks things out, so you're clear that the money that you're providing for that is actually going to the town and the county, because it's the county who reminds us often that they pay that percentage portion of it, so that you're getting your bang for the buck for that amount. But we still have a fair amount of we get grants, and we also get contracts from other organizations to do recycling as well. So we should have something for the September meeting, but not having the policy in place till the following year gives us all time to look at it and provide any feedback. So even if it's a draft policy for us to fit in, and we can provide you with the feedback for that in September.
Tony, I apologize for, I should have had you introduce yourself. I believe everyone knows you.
Louise
but-
Conley, I'm the chair for the Recycle Council.
Okay, I believe everyone knows you, but I should have did that
Did you
first.
sit here, Louise?
No, next to you, right there, okay.
I still have a sore knee.
No, you don't, because there's a board behind us.
So if I
keep
may
grabbing
just
your arm.
add to
Go ahead.
that, so certainly, certainly we tried to get this out to the group so that you could be aware, and in particular for something like the costing of an audit, if this budget is passed and then we're going to fund you, we would be
Yep.
respectful of that as part of the funding process.
And the cost of the audit, right now, I believe it's around and I'm not good with numbers, but I believe it's about $5,000, and to do the full audit would
Closer to
double,
10,
be up to
yeah.
close to 10.
Yeah.
So.
Thank
But
you.
we're working with the accountant on how to put it together, because an audit would be for the whole thing, but we could do the budget on that money, because just like a lot of grants that we get, we have to show where those grants specifically go. So doing one for the town's money is not a problem. Just
Okay.
one more step.
Thank you. Any other questions from the media? No one else have any questions? Okay, then I need a vote to go in camera.
Need a motion?
Okay, all in favor? Those opposed, carried.
The fact that there was no additional.
Okay, motion's coming, or sorry, motion to adjourn.
I will make that motion.
Okay, Councilor Sorensen, all in favor?
And yes.